Hi, and welcome to the Candice Malcolm Show. I am your host, Candice Malcolm. We have a fantastic show for you today. We're going to talk about the Ontario election. We're going to go and do a bit of a deep dive into the parties and the topics and the important issues facing people in this province. And we're going to talk about the Liberal leadership debate last night, the French language debate, which, let me just say, it was a disaster for Mark Carney. Not that you would know if you watch the legacy media, who are completely covering for him, but we will go through and break that down. But first, I think congratulations is in order for NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. Yes, at midnight, last night, at midnight, he officially qualified for a multi-million-dollar pension, a gold-plated, taxpayer-funded, multi-billion-dollar pension. Well, congratulations, Jagmeet Singh, man, you earned it. All you had to do was sell out your country, sell out your values, sell out your constituents, sell out the country, and in return, you got your multi-million-dollar pension. I hope it is worth it. So maybe, does this mean that we can finally have an election in this country? Can we finally have a choice and a say in who represents us and who will be our prime minister? Let's hope so. So let's just walk you through it. So Jagmeet Singh was first elected 6 years ago today. And that means 6 years is what the time required to qualify for a federal pension as a member of Parliament. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation estimates that if Jagmeet Singh took his pension early, took it at age 55 and lives to age 90, taxpayers will be on the hook for approximately $2.3 million to Jagmeet Singh. In order to get a pension, you must serve for 6 years. And if you serve before 2016, you get your full pension at 55. Jagmeet Singh came in after that, so he gets his full pension at 65, but he can have a reduced pension if he would like, starting at age 55. And their pension equates to about 23% of their salary. Must be nice. Must be nice. I am a entrepreneur and a business owner. And if you are a business owner or if you work in the private sector, most likely you don't have any kind of pension. Certainly not a defined benefit pension like these members of Parliament get. And really, Jagmeet Singh should have pulled the plug on this government 18 months ago, or at least a year ago, if he had a conscience, if he was doing what was best for the people in his riding, the people in this country. Jagmeet Singh would have forced an election before Justin Trudeau could continue to do the damage that he did. But many speculate that the real reason that Jagmeet Singh continued to prop up this Liberal government time and time and time again, upwards of 200 times, the reason he did it was for his own paycheck, for his own self-interest, because he wanted that pension. Well, presumably now that the pension is here, Jagmeet, you can finally do the right thing. Don't worry, taxpayers are going to take care of you. But please, please let us have an election. And speaking of elections, the Liberals held their first leadership debate last night. Remember that they worked in extra overdrive to make sure that Ruby Dalla was disqualified, kicking her out over the weekend. She didn't even know about it. She found out live on a CBC interview. CBC got the news from the Liberal Party before the candidate herself even learned. Completely ridiculous. So they wanted to do everything they could to keep her off the stage. And now we know why. Because Mark Carney, who is completely untested, right? He's never been elected. He's never even tried to be elected. He's never been part of an election before. We saw why. He was a complete disaster on the stage last night. He was incoherent. He could barely string his sentences together. He was reading off a cue card. He's just not very good at this. He's not very good at this. And the media don't want you to know about that, which is why you wouldn't really know how bad it was for him if you were just watching the traditional press. So we've got a couple of clips for you. Really, Chrystia Freeland was the one who was kind of dominating the event last night. She speaks fluent French. And look, I am personally not a French speaker. And I don't necessarily think it's important that everyone speaks French. I don't even care if the Conservative leader speaks French, because most of the people who vote for the Conservative Party are not in the French-speaking part of the country. But for the Liberals, it's a different standard, because the Liberal Party is the party that wins in Quebec. They are the party that supposedly represents the sort of bilingualism of this country, French and English. And by their own standards, you should speak French. So the fact that Mark Carney couldn't was a little bit of an embarrassment, given the fact that this guy has been mentioned in circles of potentially being a prime minister for like a decade. Justin Trudeau has been trying to recruit him into his cabinet for years and years and years. He's been advising Justin Trudeau. He knew that this time was coming. It's actually pretty surprising and pretty embarrassing how bad his French really was. We're going to get to that in a second. We'll start with Chrystia Freeland, who was doing her whole shtick. So let me just say, if you watch this debate and you believe everything you said, you would think that we were like on the verge of World War III, Canada versus the United States, because this issue of the Trump tariffs dominated the event. Every single thing went back to it. The Liberals are really sort of beating the drum of fear and trying to create fear and outrage over the Trump comments. And it was really clear. So here is a clip of Chrystia Freeland saying that Trump represents the greatest threat to Canada since the Second World War.
Trump represents the greatest threat to Canada since World War II. He is threatening us with an economic war, and that's nothing new. The last time that he was president, he threatened us too, and at the end of the day, I succeeded in protecting our economy. But this time, Trump's threats are worse. He wants to turn Canada into the 51st state, and it's no joke.
So the entire sort of manufactured crisis that Donald Trump is coming to invade us and that he wants our minerals and that he's literal and he's super serious, that he's going to invade Canada, that was the theme of the night. Mark Carney echoing this, saying that this is the biggest crisis of our lifetime, that this is bigger than COVID, this is bigger than the 2008 financial crisis, this is the biggest crisis ever in Canada. And Mark Carney supposedly is the only one that can save us from this. Let's play that clip.
At this time, Canada is facing the worst crisis of our lifetime, and to get through it, we have to make big changes. I can be useful there. I know how to get through crises.
So you could see him stumbling and awkwardly pushing through his words there, reading off a cue card. Not very smooth. There was a couple of huge gaffes that Mark Carney had last night. I think the big one of the night when he was talking about foreign policy and he was talking about Hamas. And basically he said that he agrees with Hamas. I think he meant to say that he agrees on Hamas. And even at the time when he was saying it, Chrystia Freeland kind of jumped in to save him. And she hurriedly injected against, because he accidentally said we agree with Hamas. Again, just showing how he doesn't really speak French properly. Another one that came up was they were talking about the CBC and how Pierre Poilievre rightfully wants to defund the CBC. And Mark Carney was rambling incoherently and said something about how Pierre Poilievre wants to abolish Quebec. Apparently, according to Mark Carney, Pierre Poilievre wants to abolish Quebec. Again, I don't think he meant to say that, but that's what he said. And it just shows how out of depth he is. I spoke to a Quebec commentator, a fellow named Jean-Philippe Fournier, who's a former advisor and chief of staff to the finance minister in Quebec. And he told me, this is what he said to me. He said, Carney was surprisingly bad at French, oftentimes seemed visibly confused or unable to read basic questions, right? So he basically just was a disgrace, is what Jean-Philippe told me. He said he might not survive a real debate against Pierre Poilievre. And this was actually echoed on the CBC of all places. Stephen Taylor, a conservative activist on X, reports that French CBC predicts that Mark Carney would get destroyed in a French debate against Mark Carney. Imagine how conflicted those Laurentian elites will feel when their golden boy, Mark Carney, embarrasses himself again, not being able to speak French properly in a debate against a conservative who happens to speak fluent French. That's not going to go over very well. So things aren't going well for the Liberals federally. The English debate is actually tonight. And you can join. I will be, we're going to do a live event alongside the debate, myself and Kian Bexty. So we will be with you live tonight to walk you through the English debate. We're really looking forward to that. And there's another election happening in this country right now. It's going to be on Thursday, is the election day in Ontario. Will Doug Ford get his third consecutive majority government? It looks like it. Recent polls show the PCs are up at 45%, with the Liberals trailing at 27 and the NDP down at 19, which could equate to the PCs having as much as 91 seats in Queen's Park, again, cruising towards their third majority. But you know what? The Progressive Conservatives aren't the only choice on the political right. You could argue that the Progressive Conservatives aren't on the political right anymore, that they are a centrist, or in many ways, a center-left party, which is not what we wanted, not what we expected, but that is what has come to pass. So today, I'm very delighted to be joined by people who represent that other conservative alternative and option in this election, the Ontario Party. So I'm joined by Ontario Party leader Derek Sloan, who's been the leader since 2021. You might remember Derek Sloan because he used to be a Conservative member of Parliament, and he ran in the leadership race, the one to replace Andrew Scheer, ended up losing to Aaron O'Toole, getting expelled from the caucus in 2021. So he joins the program alongside Randy Hillier. Randy Hillier is a former member of the provincial parliament from 2007 to 2022, and he now holds a senior leadership role in the Ontario Party. So Randy, Derek, great to have you on the program. Thanks for joining us.
With you this morning, Candice.
Great. Well, I see you there, Randy. I don't know where Derek is, but hopefully he'll jump on and join us in a moment. So the election, sorry, go ahead.
I said, I think we may be having some difficulty with his technology and connection, but we'll see if we get him back on shortly.
Okay, excellent. Well, we'll keep trying behind the scenes there. But first, Randy, why don't you just tell us a little bit about the Ontario Party? What is it? What do they stand for? And how did you get involved?
Well, the Ontario Party is, of course, just a provincial party. We don't engage in national politics, but I think it's important for people to understand Ontario is the largest party, largest province in our confederation, and so goes Ontario, goes confederation in many aspects. We are 40% of the population, 40% of the GDP. So the federal government can't do much without Ontario's agreement. And we have seen Doug Ford and Justin Trudeau and now Mark Carney all singing from the same song sheet. You wouldn't know that they're from different parties, actually. They're so close together. But the Ontario Party represents those people who want to see smaller, less government, the people who would rather have a Doge in Ontario rather than a Ford in Ontario, if I might say, and who stand to represent and promote and protect faith, freedom, and our families, which have been very significantly abused and taken advantage of by all of the established political parties. So we're offering a very distinct choice. And of course, I'm glad to join with Derek Sloan as leader of the party. Derek and I have similar backgrounds. We're both from elected office with conservative parties. And we were also both removed from our caucuses. We both attempted to run for the leadership of our respective parties. But we're both outspoken and believe elected representatives should have a voice and not just a muzzle. And that's with all established parties. The muzzle comes first and the obedience rather than the representation.
Interesting. Okay. Well, why don't you tell us? So one of the things that is sort of for me as a mother of little kids and looking at some of the things that the Ontario government has done, I had some high hopes for Doug Ford because he came in opposing Kathleen Wynne's really controversial sex education program that she implemented. And he seemed like he was going to be governed a bit more like a social conservative. He even said that he was pro-life at one point. And I think we've been sorely disappointed, to put it mildly, based on so much of the legislation that they've put forward. I mean, everything from imposing racial equity in classes. Remember that Bill 67? I had Barbara Kay on my show back in 2022, and she adamantly warned against it and how it was basically just instilling this idea that Canada is a bunch of white supremacists and that we need some kind of a radical equity program in our schools. There's also been really controversial things when it comes to gender ideology, the radical gender ideology that is putting that lens into our classrooms. True North's Sue-Ann Levy has written many pieces on how woke Ontario schools have become, and it's really a concern to parents. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the education in specific, like what would an Ontario party advocate differently?
Well, you're absolutely correct. And like you, we had high hopes. I had high hopes. I was a member of the Conservative caucus in Ontario when Ford won his majority in 2018. And of course, everything that you just said, Candice, is absolutely true. Ford did campaign to remove the sex ed curriculum from our schools and gave every indication that he was going to govern as an actual conservative. But as we've seen with so many other conservative leaders, you campaign on the right and you govern to the left. And Ford has been no different than so many others. And as I said at the outset, Ford and Trudeau and now Carney, there is no light between these three on any subject. And we're proposing that parents actually take back education from these bureaucrats and from these left-wing ideologues who are destroying, confusing, distorting our youngsters' minds with this rainbow agenda that they have, with this critical race theory. And one of our outstanding solutions to this is to breed competition into the education system and choice by establishing vouchers for parents to so they can select which school they might want and allow institutions to flourish in Ontario and allow parents that choice so that their children can actually be educated rather than indoctrinated.
Great. Well, it looks like we're finally joined by Derek Sloan on the line. Derek, can you hear me? Derek, well, I can see him, but I don't know that he can hear us. So, okay, we'll stick with you, Randy. Can you tell us, like, what are?
I can. Thank you, Candice, for having us today.
Oh, great. Okay, we can hear you, Derek, but we can't really see you. I think your screen might be frozen there. Okay, it looks like Derek's still having some. Okay, yeah, we can hear you, Derek. So thanks for joining the show.
I can hear you. Fine.
Okay, yeah. So Randy was just telling us, Derek, about the education platform for the Ontario Party. Oh, why don't you tell us a little bit more of your motivation with the Ontario Party? What what brought you to the party, and what it is that you're running on in this election? Can you hear me, Derek?
Sure. Can you hear me okay now, Candice?
Yeah, let's give it a go. Can you tell us about your motivation?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me, Candice?
Go ahead, Derek. You're on.
Yes, of course. So, like many parents, I'm a parent of three small children, and we heard the rhetoric of Doug Ford. Yes, I can. Yes, I'm talking. Can you guys hear me at all?
Yeah, go ahead, Derek. You're
Testing.
Okay, we're gonna move on here,
Testing.
folks. We're gonna try to get Derek back online.
Yes.
A little later on.
So in 2018, we heard the same rhetoric.
Well, that's unfortunate that we couldn't connect properly with Derek there. So Randy, we'll go back to you. One of the things that really piqued my interest. Now, we did a Twitter Spaces or an X Spaces last week, and one of the things that you said was that your party, Ontario Party, is calling for a complete moratorium on immigration. I didn't know that the provincial government could do that. I know that Quebec has some leeway when it comes to their province's immigration program. Why don't you walk us through, first of all, why you want a moratorium on immigration and how that would come about provincially?
Well, let's start off with rampant and uncontrolled immigration numbers are impacting every aspect of our society, of our communities, of our standard of living and well-being. Candice, this increasing number of new immigrants every year, foreign students, temporary foreign workers, refugees, are putting great demands on our housing stock. We have a increasing demand with new immigration, but a pretty static and stable supply of housing. So this is putting upwards pressures significantly on the cost of housing, not just for purchases, but also for rental. And we're seeing that in spades with the inconceivable number of homeless encampments now that have sprung up across Ontario. But it's also putting two pressures on the standard of living with respect to employment. The increasing supply of labor is depressing wages. It's also with the government's use of wage subsidies on new immigrants is putting new Canadians in an advantageous position for jobs. They're getting better access to jobs because the government is subsidizing their employment. So we're seeing an increasing unemployment rate as well as depressed wages with the immigration policy. And it also has other impacts on things like healthcare. When I left elected office just 2.5 years ago, Candice, there was 1 million Ontario people without a family doctor in Ontario. That number has skyrocketed now to 2.5 million. 2.5 million people in Ontario can't find a family doctor. And of course, if you're bringing in millions of people into the country every year, it shouldn't surprise anyone that we're bringing in greater numbers than we're able to recruit and train doctors, bringing in our ability to improve our housing stocks. And it's also having a huge and profound impact on the educational and institutional scams with immigration. We see this with the scams on the private education, where foreign students are coming here apparently to go to get an education, but these schools, they never even attend school. And we have the truck driving scams, often involved with or tied to immigration. And of course, we also have this explosion in the criminal activity that's tied with this immigration policy. And of course, Donald Trump has spoken widely about that. Many of your audience may not be aware that a major Canadian bank headquartered here in Ontario was just recently convicted in the United States and fined $3 billion for facilitating and being involved in the money laundering of the drug cartels and the criminal activity from immigration. That's a TD Bank. The U.S. states have fined $3 billion and convicted them of this criminal money laundering and facilitating the criminal cartels. But our own attorney generals in the Crown here in Canada have not touched that subject at all. So we're now on the precipice of a very dangerous trade war. And much of it is centered around this immigration policy. So that's the background. The solution, though, is pretty obvious. Immigration is a shared concern. It's a shared jurisdiction in our Constitution between the provinces and the federal government. And we're just saying what is obvious. We are going to take back our role in immigration. The federal government cannot determine unilaterally how many immigrants come to Ontario. And we're saying we're going to have zero until we get our unemployment levels down to a very modest position, until our housing stocks and affordability is improved, until our education and our healthcare is improved. There'll be zero new immigrants coming into Ontario. And in addition, we've also proposed that we would create a new enforcement branch called the Immigration and Criminal Enforcement branch that would be tasked with investigating the criminal activities engaged with these illegal immigration, and also the ability to apprehend people who are here illegally and deport them. So we will take ownership of our jurisdiction, which is included in the Constitution.
So what would you do then? I mean, it's interesting how the positions have changed, right? We had 9 years of open borders with Justin Trudeau. And yet in the debate last night, we heard Mark Carney pledging that he would also cap immigration, but they wouldn't cap it the way you would. They wouldn't have a full moratorium. So what would you do, Randy, if there was a Liberal government in power that wanted to bring in millions of newcomers each year? How would you stop them? And how would you say we are not going to take any new ones in Ontario?
So historically, what's happened, Candice, and this is what's happened with immigration, is the same as what we've allowed happen in our healthcare and education. The provinces have agreed, they've engaged in a memorandum of understanding, a contractual arrangement with the federal government to abdicate their jurisdiction in these positions in exchange for transfer funds. The federal government can't do it unless there's agreement with the province. So the federal government has agreed, and the provinces have agreed to accept substantial transfers of taxpayers' money for things like English as a second language, subsidized housing, additional educational and social programs for immigrants in exchange for allowing the feds to make all the decisions. We're just simply going to say we're not going to take that money, and we're not going to allow immigrants. And unlike Trudeau and Carney, who are saying that they're going to reduce the rampant and uncontrolled immigration, we're saying no. Until things are improved and fixed, there'll be zero new immigrants into our province.
Well, it's interesting because if you look at Canada's historic data with immigration, yes, we've always been a country that have welcomed immigrants, and that's part of our DNA in our country. But there's always been peaks and valleys, right? So you had periods where, 4 or 5 years where lots and lots of newcomers came. And then basically we would close our doors and say, okay, we're going to take a few years, let everybody intermix and integrate, and maybe we'll take some more later. And it basically wasn't until the 1990s that we had a wall of just constantly increasing immigration under both Conservatives and Liberals. We did have a quick reprieve during COVID, where not a lot of people were coming just because of COVID. But now it's back to levels absolutely unprecedented in Canadian history. And I think that consensus is growing, that this is not working, that we don't want to let in that many people anymore. Randy, I'm told that we have Derek back on the line. He's still having some technical issues, so I believe he's just on the phone, but I did want to bring him into the conversation. Derek, can you hear me now? Okay, it doesn't sound like we do. Derek, can you hear me? Let's try one more time. Okay. All right. We're gonna sadly give up on the idea of getting Derek to join the show because I just don't think it's working for him today. But I
think that's very symbolic of the poor quality infrastructure that we also have in rural Ontario. Both Derek and I live in rural Ontario, and our internet broadband infrastructure is entirely substandard in many areas of the province. But just going back, finish off. You're absolutely correct. And Candice, we have had the only policy on immigration that we've had is a fire hose, like the valves full open since 1990. And I would even say during COVID, those numbers still were excessive, especially on the foreign workers and foreign students, and also refugees as well. So, and just for the audience to understand, the federal government can't even give us a precise or near precise number on how many people are here illegally at the present time. But their best guess is somewhere between 2 and 4 million people in our country are here illegally, either under expired work visas, expired student visas, refugees who have not gone through the tribunal process. So just to put that in perspective, that's, up to 10% of everybody in Canada may be here illegally.
Unbelievable. And it's really spilling out. And I think, like I said, I think that there's going to be a new consensus. I'd like to see more conservative politicians and governments to take a bolder position on this, because it's not working for anyone. So I want to take a step back and ask about the Ontario Party. So, we have progressive conservatives. People who aren't from Ontario might not really understand what that means. But I would describe them as a centrist, if not possibly a center-left government. And yet, Ontario, especially rural parts, is a pretty conservative place. So why is it that the PC party in Ontario has had to go so far to the center or even a bit into the left? And why isn't there a more kind of mainstream right-wing alternative? I know that there's also a party called the New Blue Party, started by former MPP Jim Karahalios, the husband of Belinda Karahalios, who's the party's first MPP. First of all, why don't you tell us why we have two offshoot right-wing parties, and maybe tell us a bit about why the Progressive Conservatives aren't very conservative?
Well, let's start with the latter first. So, there's many different aspects, but I will start off first by saying this: all the established parties, and we've seen this in spades, I would say, Candice, is we are witnessing a very overt abuse of the electoral system for their benefit, and to the detriment and consequence of the people. We see that with this very snap, quick, and short election called here in Ontario. We also see it with the Trudeau's use of prorogation of Parliament. Both these uses of legislative authority and parliamentary authority are it's a crass attempt to keep the existing politicians in power to the detriment of the people. And I would also say, the same it would be applicable with this trade war. A junior high diplomat would have been able to resolve these differences between Canada and the United States in just a simple manner as what we're proposing with the Ontario Party. Fix up our immigration policy, fix up our borders, prevent the criminal activity from transiting and taking refuge here. And Sam Cooper's done a lot of great work on that as well. But, Ford, Trudeau, Carney see that, you've heard the term, never let a good crisis go to waste in politics. And that applies even when you have to fabricate a crisis. And the trade war, in my view, is just as big a fabrication as COVID was. It's a crisis of convenience for the political establishment. And I would say, what differs, the Ontario Party differs from all others in that everybody who's involved in our party have a long track record of standing up and saying what is truthful and willing to take the consequences for that. Both Derek and I have been removed from our respective caucuses. Both Derek and I were the only two elected individuals in Ontario in January of 2021 who formed the End the Lockdown caucus. There was other politicians who, at the provincial and federal level, who were opposed to COVID, but they refused to be public. They refused to participate in the End the Lockdown caucus, and I think that really defines the difference between the Ontario Party and all others. That we say what we mean, and we mean what we say, and we're prepared to do what's necessary. And I would also say, Doug Ford doesn't have to govern to the left. He chooses to govern to the left. There are aspects of the urbanization levels and whatnot that do come into play. But, at the end of the day, it's a choice that he's decided. It was a choice for him to lie to the people of Ontario about the sex education. It was a choice by Doug Ford to lie about the Greenbelt and now be investigated by the RCMP for ensuring that his friends and wealthy donors and supporters would derive ill-gotten gains and profits from his legislative agenda. So, it's not just about right and left. It's not about just a political spectrum, Candice. This is about integrity and honesty in elected representation in government.
Well, it's so interesting because I think that the world, at least in North America, has shifted since COVID, and that I think that history has shown. I mean, you've been vindicated in your positions when you were calling to end the lockdowns, all of your activism on COVID. I think part of the reason that we just saw Donald Trump win a majority popular opinion or popular vote election down in the States, basically winning in a landslide, is because people were sick of a lot of the things that happened in the COVID and post-COVID world. I think Justin Trudeau's popularity took a similar dive because that was sort of when the mask first slipped and people really started to see that other side of Justin Trudeau. And so I'm wondering, did Doug Ford was part of that whole, lockdown, COVID madness, out of control, heavy-handed, big government approach? Why do you think that there hasn't been a similar sort of backlash against him? Is it because the other parties in Ontario are so weak? And I'm specifically talking about the Liberals and the NDP, or is there something else that attributes to Mr. Ford's popularity?
Well, we know that he's not popular. In Ontario, over 60% of the people in Ontario in the recent polls have said it's time for a change. And that great of a number is historically guarantees that the incumbent is removed. But we have to understand the context and the circumstances that we're in with for many years, we've had a very suffocating level of censorship in this province, in this country. We remain to have a very suffocating public square with our legacy media. No dissenting voices are permitted to be on the legacy media. Our political environment is very much like our media environment. There is the legacy political parties and the legacy media act one and the same. They do not allow any dissenting voices anywhere, Candice. You're aware of that, and I'm sure all your audiences as well. So it is hard to break through that level of suffocating censorship in our country. But we're going to continue to try. And I would say one other element that many of people that are listening may not be aware of this, but from my 15 years in elected office, I would say the establishment political parties want people to stay at home on voting day. They lower voter turnout is actually beneficial for the established political parties. The last thing they want is unhappy, disaffected, or disenfranchised voters going to the polls. And we have in Ontario in the last election, we had a tremendously abysmal number, historic low of 43% of Ontario voters went to the polls. So 57% stayed at home and on the couch. And many of them are the unhappy and even angry. And this plays into the hands of Ford and others that keep the unhappy people at home, have a quick snap election, don't allow the other guys to get a leg up, convince those unhappy voters that there's no choice, that there's no solution. And I've often said, when you stay at home on ballot day, you ensure that corrupt politicians stay in power. And it's as simple as that. If you're staying at home, you are actually doing what Doug Ford and Justin Trudeau want you to do.
Well, I think that's a great message to our audience. If you are in Ontario, even if you don't like the Progressive Conservatives, you don't have to stay at home. You have other options. You can vote for a real, authentic Conservative Party, a socially conservative party as well that represents your values. And I really appreciate you joining the show today, Randy. Thank you, and good luck on Thursday.
It's been a pleasure, Candice, and we'll look forward to chatting again another time. And on February 27th, the people in Ontario can take back Ontario, and if they choose to do so, it will take a big stride towards taking back Canada as well. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much, Randy. And indeed, Canada needs to change. We cannot continue on this path. We cannot allow woke politicians to continue to push an agenda that is counter to everything about this country and the way it's been built, families and the raising of children, educating them in the correct and proper way, not filling their minds with woke leftist ideology. I don't know another issue that I get more animated about than the woke ideology that they push in our schools. It is so sick and twisted. And I hope that the people of Ontario will send a message to this government that they need to change, that they cannot continue to push this nonsense on our children. All right, folks, thanks so much for joining. Sorry about the technical difficulties that we had there, trying to get Derek Sloan on. We'll have to have him on another time in the future, but we appreciate you bearing with us. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will be back again tomorrow with all the news. Thank you, and God bless.